Right, well, welcome, gentlemen. As I mentioned up here in the lectern, we're going to be talking about hurdles to implementation for Zero Trust. From what I've heard, there's no shortage of hurdles, but a lot of overcoming those hurdles, and that's where I want to start today's conversation is, there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to Zero Trust. It's not just this product you can buy, and therefore there's challenges that federal agencies face in their implementation. So in starting with those hurdles, I'd love to hear how you've overcome them if you have, and if you have, how have you overcome them? Has it been cultural hurdles, technical hurdles, policy hurdles, or a group of all of those? So Paul, you're the first one up next to me. I know you talk a lot about this, but I'd love to hear, the way that labor is going about its Zero Trust implementation and, the hurdles you've faced.
Yeah, so thanks, Billy. Yeah, Department of Labor, we've had our share of hurdles. Let me just tell you where we're sort of at, though, right now. So we thought we came at this, we were lucky that I think we came at it, number one, we had a rather mature identity, credentialing, and access management program prior to the executive order. We were already modernizing into the cloud substantially prior to the executive order. So I think those two things, along with DOL's rather unique amongst the federal government that we are so centralized in our IT. Like 80% of the department reports up through the CIO directly for IT. So we're not as federated as some others. So we had some advantages there. But you mentioned, is it people, process, really, or technology that are maybe the hurdles? And it is all of them. I would say at Department of Labor, the one we've had the least with is policy and procedure. We've been able to not have much challenges there. Technology, I don't think we've run into any technology challenges that we sort of, didn't expect, right? I think everyone runs into things where, yeah, perhaps the glossy slick sheet from your vendor painted a picture that's not quite what you get, but nothing, again, we didn't expect, right? Now, it has been the people one. If I had anything to do over again, it would be to have better communication, collaboration, and in-depth discussions with our IT cohort that needed to do things. We had a great communication plan for our end users to let them know what was coming and to smooth that. But beyond kind of a high-level, strategy that we released to our IT group about what Zero Trust is and here's what's going to happen, we're going to be doing this and that. We didn't get into the weeds with some of them, and that ended up, we discovered a lot of things. I equate it a little bit to, if you ever watch those home improvement shows, right? We were going to make an open concept now out of something that was all chopped up, right? And when you start pulling down the walls, you find things then that you didn't expect. And we found a lot of things that had been built up over time, IT-wise, whether it was, ways things were designed, built, or even managed, that were really reliant on sort of the old way of doing things. And as we ran into them, those delayed us a little bit then in implementation. Now, I do like to point out that all the bruises and bumps that we took during that time, because we ate our own dog food first, right? CIO went first with Zero Trust. All those bumps, bruises we got will pay off now because we've got a lot smoother than as we roll it out to the program areas.
I love Zero Trust analogies. I feel like it always comes back to some sort of house, building a house, protecting a house, security systems. Mitch, I'm going to skip you for a second because I want to stay at the agency level, but we'll come back. But Dr. Stanley, I'd love to hear from NASA's perspective, just at another agency perspective, what your hurdles have been and how you've looked to kind of head on with those.
Well, interestingly enough, we're kind of in the other direction. We were very much a center-centric organization where each of the centers had pretty much autonomy in terms of what they could do on IT. And over the past several years, we've been working to move towards that enterprise model. which, oh, by the way, we had some really forward-thinking leaders and technologists that were kind of building those zero trust things in as we were making that morphing of the networks. Now, when the EO came out, we recognized that there's some things that maybe we didn't think about. So we went in, we decomposed the executive order, all those OMB memos, determined that we had a lot of requirements to deal with. And so the agency stood up what we call our cybersecurity improvement portfolio. All of the technology projects and initiatives that are going to be delivering zero trust on NASA networks well, we'll get to that in just a second. But the CISSP is where those projects and initiatives are being managed. Now, NASA, you've got to think of us kind of like a three-legged stool. We have our corporate network that delivers all of the business-related kinds of things for the agency. We have our mission networks, and that's an S behind networks. And we have our federally funded Research and Development Center, Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Now, JPL isn't technically a part of NASA, but we are very closely related. And so things that happen on our network impacts them, things that happen on their network impacts us, so that relationship, like I said, is very close. Now, we're focusing on our corporate network because if we're going to make mistakes and we're going to do things that are going to break things, we want to do it on the corporate side, not on the mission side. I mean, I don't want to be the guy that has to tell the Voyager 1 program manager that your spacecraft is not going to send any more science back to Earth, even though it's out in interstellar space, even though it's still sending back data today because we did something stupid. So we're going to make sure that as we roll out zero trust to our mission side, and there's a lot of different parts of that. There's aeronautic research, there's exploring systems, there are space systems, there's space operations. We want to make sure that we factor in the risk of every change that we would require of them to move to zero trust to make sure that it doesn't break those missions. Now, getting down to what we really had problems with or things that we're really dealing with today, there's two areas. And I was actually going to tip over to Mr. McEwen. We talked to Randy Resnick early on and got some good advice from him in terms of how to approach this thing. And from his perspective, it was take a balanced approach. Work all of those pillars in concert, continue to improve, to mature, you'll reach zero trust. And so we're moving in that direction. But there were two areas where we're a little bit behind. One is data, and I think probably everybody has a little challenge with data. And the other is identity, and there's two factors for that. NASA is required by statute to share the science with all humankind. All humankind. That's every person on planet Earth. So there's data that we have to share worldwide. On the other end of the scale, we have data that we cannot share with anyone. ITAR data, CUI, PHI, PII. All of those same kind of problems everybody else has, we have that as well at NASA. So it's a very complex data environment for us. And then on top of that, we have the identity side, where we have very complex identity requirements in terms of, like we look at our corporate network, 3 nines of uptime. But on the mission side, it's 5 nines of uptime. So we can't just go to some monolithic solution that's going to reduce that uptime. We have to have a federated model that's going to support our missions. But on top of that is all of the other stakeholders. So it's not just government civilians and contractors. It's not just our industry partners in space. It's not just friendly space agencies from across the world. We have some frenemies in our midst as well. And so we have to make sure that we're protecting that data as best we can using those zero trust principles. And I got to tell you, we're kind of excited about the promise that zero trust is going to bring to that.
That's great. That's very exciting. Mitch and Brandon, I'd like to group you guys together a little bit because you play a bit of a different role in helping shepherd or work with agencies on this journey from like an outside perspective, to call it one way. But would love to hear, from that that guidance perspective, how are you seeing agencies encounter hurdles and overcome them?
Yeah, I can start if you don't mind. We sit within the White House in the Office of Management and Budget, and our goal when the administration decided there did need to be a change here early on was how to implement the executive order, how to define zero trust. Put out a number of memos, which, you know, I'm required by law to say all the policy is pristine and works perfectly. But no, you know, it is a complex environment. And what we tried to do is set a baseline for zero trust and really kind of get agencies to a point over the next few years in having a technological foundation to excel along this path. And there have been documents since then, you know, the Zero Trust Maturity Model and others, but really we started off with implementation plans from agencies, and we worked with them where we saw opportunities, where we saw gaps. We worked with them with a little tiger team that include people from the US Digital Service, people from CISA, including Sean, who spoke earlier, and others, and we really tried to get things started on the right path. Everywhere in government, there will be technical challenges. It's a very diverse environment, very federated. If you've seen one agency, you've seen exactly one agency. So, you know, that part didn't surprise us very much. We knew there had to be that flexibility. The cultural issues, you know, I think was off the starting block something similar to what was said on both, you know, by everyone here. Something we really did need to address and work on with the CIOs and CISOs, and I think that was an area that probably the first year was, yes, the technology was moving forward, yes, we were driving for results, but these were really aggressive goals, and when you're talking about very enterprise level visibility and then refining access across an enterprise and keeping speed and access and service delivery how is expected, that was a big challenge, and I think a lot of the first year was getting that cultural movement to get people to understand what the goals of Zero Trust were and all driving in the same direction, and that it wasn't something that came off the shelf, that this was going to be a journey and something that was going to be a new perspective in how we handle all of this. And we also stood up, and I'll make it short because I know we're moving through time quick, but we stood up things like communities of action, so things that were particularly, you know, granular or hard to do, like getting full multi-factor authentication and phishing resistance across the entire federal government and on all systems. We built communities of action to really try and drive that and build pilots and things that agencies could share with each other about how they could do it. So a lot of things like that to try and drive things forward.
That's great, and if we have time, we'll come back to that topic because I think that's important. But Brandon, I wanted to get the industry's perspective because I know industry plays an incredible role in this and helping eliminate those roadblocks. So how have you at Rancher sort of worked with agencies on this journey to ensure that they overcome those roadblocks that they've been facing early on?
Yeah, thanks, Billy. So everyone on the stage has brought up culture. Culture is certainly a big part of that, and especially with the modernizing workforce, we saw COVID usher in a new era of philosophies, mentalities, and abilities into the government spectrum. But what we've seen is lately we've been asking way too much out of our warfighters, out of our operators to take a security mindset. We primarily serve the DoD and IC, and it's come to a point now where we almost expect our enlisted soldiers to come out of boot camp with a Security Plus certification just to be able to operate within these government networks. And that's inefficient and it's too much. We've seen where industry has, the government agencies have ushered too much of the responsibility when it comes to securing these software stacks once they get to their networks. It proves inefficient and it opens the door for human risk and unfortunately a lot of toil in configuring and securing these systems. What we've seen is industry, and now with CISA's championing, they're asking us to take a more secure by design and secure by default mentality. This concept of not shipping an insecure software package, but shipping a hardened software package. And rather than providing a hardening guide, actually provide loosening guides. We believe in taking that mentality. We launched what we used to call RKE Government, our Secure by Design Kubernetes distribution, but we saw adoption throughout industry all the way down to home lab communities because security is good for everybody, no matter if you're a weapon system or an old server running in your basement. Unfortunately, the adversaries are that complex and cast that wide of a net. So by taking the mentality of shipping a secure product, where upstream Kubernetes, the containerization orchestration framework from DISA has 168 different security controls that you need to turn those knobs in order to have a secure baseline. That's way too many. Our Secure by Design RK2 distribution only has 28. We are seeing an interest and a need within the government community of securing the baseline more left in this situation and allowing our customers and our users to actually deploy on day one in a secure state and have a shorter time to an ATO and mission production using that methodology.
That's great. And so I wanted, we're running out of time really quickly with this large panel, but I wanted to focus on, what are those resources out there? Mitch alluded to sort of the action groups, I think you called them, or something along those lines. Those resources out there, but also that sort of community of sharing of lessons, because I think that's going to be how, maybe some of the folks on stage have been the more successful ones in this space, but others out there might be struggling more. So how do we uplift the whole of government so that Zero Trust really can prosper, because it really is an interconnected network across the federal government. So whether it's Mitch, or if Mark wants to go back to his thoughts about how he partnered and chatted with Randy Resnick, how do we kind of tie those dots together so that it's not just every agency for themselves, but everyone kind of working in lockstep to promote a larger concept of Zero Trust across the federal government?
I can start. So, look, there's been a few things. These communities of action have been great. We're on our third cohort for multi-factor authentication and building phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication, and we've worked with a dozen agencies plus on that. We've really been able to do things along the lines of really CISSO's helped us lead on things like cyberstat workshops, where we've had thousands of federal employees in the technical space kind of talk through not just the policy, but the fine-grained issues they're dealing with, and collaborate around that, build FAQs out of that feedback on the policy and how the rubber hits the road. And then, in addition to that, I think, there's just been also kind of trainings that Zero Trust trainings that CISA has offered to personnel across the federal government that have been really great at uplifting and kind of giving a common framework for everybody to understand what is the goal here, what are we looking at, and what is the ultimate endpoints. Because the technology we all use to meet these points are going to be different based on our environments, but this kind of building this common language has been really helpful.
And I'd just like to add in, on top of the training, the CISA has stood up what they call the Federal Zero Trust Managers Community of Practice. So as each cohort comes through the training, they go through the certification, they become a part of that community of practice, and we meet regularly to discuss lessons learned, best practices, share information, pretty much artifacts that can help you propel yourself forward. Something as simple as, let's say that somebody's moved forward with SOAR, right? So Security Orchestration Automation Response, and they put out an RFI. They'll share information on that, what kind of questions do they ask? What are the things they're looking for? So this community of practice is truly, it's a godsend. I mean, it's really working well for us.
Yeah, I just add that, especially in the federal space, you've got so many opportunities for collaboration and sharing, whether it's something out of Mitch's office in OMB, whether it's CISA, whether it's through NIST, whether it's through forums like this, communicating with your vendor partners. There shouldn't be a reason why you go, well, gee, I'm in this alone, because frankly, you're not, and there's informal ways too, right? We went and got information from a bunch of other agencies about how to do Zero Trust, and now we're paying it forward. Folks come ask us, how are you doing this? How are you doing that? And we're more than happy to talk to people about how we're doing it.
And I'll close with you, Brandon. I'm sure that's something that you from the industry side do as well, working with your agency partners, your defense intelligence partners, sharing that knowledge outside of just providing products. I'm sure there's a whole element of training and workshopping and making sure that they are up to speed on how to actually perform and succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big part of it, too, is instilling the confidence in the culture. Too many agencies and organizations we've talked to feel like they're not ready for Zero Trust, and they have to wait until the next modernization of their organization to be able to adopt these standards. They can do it today, utilizing the same frameworks and code that they have in place while they continue to modernize.
All right. Well, we've hit the buzzer, so we're out of time. But I wanted to give this great panel another round of applause. This has been fantastic, and really enjoyed it. So thank you guys so much.